This creepypasta is way scarier than it seems. I'm going to tell you about the Russian sleep experiment, which was so messed up even the KGB wanted to forget it happened. It was the height of the Cold War, and the Russians were obsessed with endurance experiments, pushing the limits of what the human body could withstand. The government would take people, strap them down, and keep them awake for as long as possible. And some of these tests were done on death row inmates. But this story is about something much worse. They took 5 political prisoners and told them if they agreed to take part in a science experiment, they would be set free. What did they have to do? Well, they had to stay awake for as long as possible. So they strapped them down inside a sealed chamber and pumped in pure oxygen through the air vents. But there was also another gas added into the mix, although no one knew what this gas was. It wasn't dangerous, but it seemed to give the subjects energy and make them feel great. This made the experiment seem like a piece of cake. So let me tell you what happened over the course of the next 9 days. On day 1, the subjects were wide awake, energetic, and talking. The scientists were expecting the subjects to start falling asleep at any moment, but they just kept asking for more coffee. And by the end of the 5th day, their paranoia started to show. The subjects started whispering to each other, and when the guards came near, they refused to talk to them. The scientists thought it was just a normal reaction to being tired, but they were wrong. On the 6th day, things got really weird. At first, the subjects were still wide awake and paranoid, but now they were screaming. They were screaming at the top of their lungs and wouldn't stop. The scientists tried everything they could to calm them down, but nothing worked. One of the subjects kept screaming until his vocal cords tore and he bled all over the place. But he didn't care. He just kept screaming and didn't stop until he died. After that, the other subjects stopped talking. They sat silently and stared straight ahead, completely motionless. They wouldn't respond to anything the scientists said to them, and they never slept. They spent most of their time whispering into microphones, and the guards were absolutely horrified by what they heard. The scientists had been monitoring their conversation the whole time, but before this point, it had all been fairly normal. But now they were saying things that scared them. Why are we still awake? We don't want to go to sleep. We no longer want to be free. By the 9th day, the scientists couldn't take it anymore. They desperately needed to find out what was going on because whatever it was getting worse. Finally, they decided to open the chamber. When they did, they found something truly terrifying. The subjects had spent the last 4 days mutilating themselves. They had cut off their own genitals, gouged out their own eyes, and flayed their own skin. They had ripped apart their muscles and organs and pulled them through the wounds they had made in their bodies. The scientists ran to get help, but when they came back with the medics, they were shocked. All 5 men were still alive, but they didn't know how. And when they looked inside the chamber, they saw why. The walls and ceiling were covered with flesh and blood. It looked like a slaughterhouse, and all 5 of the test subjects had somehow managed to drag themselves across the room and cover themselves in their own flesh. The scientists were stunned, but now they had an even bigger problem. They needed to get the men out of the chamber and take them to the hospital. But how? The scientists tried reasoning with them, but the subjects just screamed and clawed at the restraints. They didn't want to leave. They begged the scientists to leave them there, to let them stay awake forever. But the scientists knew they had to try, so they started to inject them with sedatives. But as soon as the scientists approached them with the needles, the subjects started thrashing around. They bit off the fingers of the scientists and gouged out their eyes. Then they dragged them to the floor and began to feast on their flesh. Even though they were being stabbed with knives, even though they were shot at and beaten with clubs, they just kept attacking the scientists and wouldn't let them put them back to sleep. It took 14 heavily armed guards to finally pull them off the scientists. And by then, the scientists realized there was only one option left. They had to kill them. So they injected the subjects with lethal doses of sedatives, but it didn't work. It took 3 times the lethal dose to finally put them to sleep. But when the scientists opened their eyes, they realized something horrible. There was only one survivor. The rest of the subjects had managed to claw their way out of their restraints while they were being injected and torn apart. But the scientists weren't able to stop them in time, and all 4 had managed to escape. When the lone survivor was finally taken out of the chamber, the scientists rushed to check on him. He looked okay on the outside, but when they checked his vitals, they realized he was dying. He had severe brain damage from lack of sleep, but then he did something that made the scientists stop in shock. As they stood over him, he whispered, "We are you, the madness that exists in every one of you, the darkness that grows when you are deprived of rest. We are your nightmares given form, your deepest fears made real." Then he looked up at the scientists with vacant eyes and whispered, "Join us." And with that, he died. The scientists were shaken by what they had just experienced. They had pushed the limits of human endurance, but what they had unleashed was something beyond anything they could have imagined. To this day, they wonder what would have happened if the other subjects hadn't been killed. They wonder if the ones who escaped are still out there, whispering to those who can hear them, tempting them to join the darkness. The whole story is pretty messed up. But is it true? Well, there are similar stories about Soviet sleep experiments that are probably based on real events, but this story is almost certainly not one of them. The closest thing to this story that I could find was a medical journal article about 2 people being kept awake for 11 days. They weren't injected with a stimulant or anything like that. They were just kept awake with medication. And after 11 days, both of them were fine except for the fact that they had lost a lot of weight. So I think this story is probably just a creepypasta. It's too gory and it's too similar to other fictional stories. Also, the ending doesn't make sense. Why would the surviving test subject tell the scientists that they are the ones that broke out? It just doesn't make sense. However, there are a lot of scary stories that came out of the Soviet Union. If you want to hear another one, stay tuned for more creepypastas, but now it's time for bed. Go to sleep so that you don't turn into a crazy monster that devours humans. Okay, kiddo, it's bedtime. Now tuck yourself in. Did you say a prayer tonight? Well, if you did, good job. Now close your eyes and go to sleep. Don't let the bed bugs bite. Wait right here for me. Oh my God, how do I stop this?